Greetings, greetings, greetings. Welcome everybody to Roll the Dice with Dave. So glad you could join us. Before we get started, just want to let everybody know this is a pre-recorded broadcast, but please don't let that stop you from liking, sharing, and subscribing. Roll the Dice with Dave can be found both on Facebook, on the Facebook page, and also on YouTube. We've had some great guests, had some great conversations with some great content, and tonight is no exception. Really looking forward to getting to speak with my guest about a topic that I don't think I've addressed yet on Roll the Dice with Dave from this perspective. So I'm really looking forward to it. So without any further hesitation, I'm going to bring my guest out, and hopefully, I hope he doesn't mind me referring to him this way, but this is Dr. Mike Badass Butler is going to be coming out. How's it going, Dr. Butler? How are you doing?
I'm feeling bad, man. I'm feeling bad always.
You know, and I love. I had to call you that name because we're in a fantasy football league together, and it's Mike Badass Butler is on the name of the fantasy football team. So
that's right.
Had to do
that's
it.
right. It's actually a takeoff from Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song.
That's a movie,
exploitation movie with Melvin Van Peebles. So yeah,
I do remember that flick, man. I remember that.
That's it. It's Beast Butler's Badass Song, and I have it same number of S's as the movie. So yeah, there we go.
That's what's up. That's awesome. Before we get started into digging deeper on the topic, I just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself a little bit, give the audience a chance to get to know you. Maybe not as well as I've gotten to know you over the last few years, which has been truly an honor and a pleasure to get to know you, and to call you a colleague and now a friend. You and I have interacted on a number of occasions, and who would have thought, right? I am born and raised New York City, grew up in the projects, to befriend somebody that probably growing up, somebody would have said, there's no way I see you being buddies with this guy. And here we are on my podcast. We've hung out, had conversations. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh man, yeah, it's a pleasure, Dr. Dave. I'm Mike Butler. I am a Keenan Distinguished Professor of History. It sounds the title is much more fancy than I am, but I've been at Flagler now for 12 years, and my specialty is 20th century American cultural history with a focus on African American history, with a specialty in civil rights history. So that is really what I have done my entire career. I love it. I learn something new every day. I get to meet incredible people such as yourself and have really deep conversations about things that, otherwise in any walk of life, maybe we would not have the time nor inclination to discuss. So that's me. I'm from South Alabama, from a working class family. It kind of struck me when you said, yeah, we never would have been friends. Nah. Being a guy of Puerto Rican descent from the ghettos of projects, or I think as you said, of New York City, and I grew up in working class apartment houses in a small Alabama town. My dad was a paper mill worker, and so yeah, that's my background. I went to Spring Hill College, Jesuit education. The thing that they taught me more than anything was that we're not here to teach you what to think. We're here to teach you how to think. And that's something that I've tried to bring into my classrooms as many times as I possibly can. And I received my master's and doctorate from the University of Mississippi.
Okay. One thing I wanted to add, because this is really going to be the basis of a lot of our conversations today, right? Being the white guy in the social justice room, you talked about civil rights history. How did you end up with that being your specialization, right? How did you end up finding that way, or going down that path that, hey, this is what I really want to specialize in?
Great question. And I think it's after the what do you do for a living question, it's probably the one that I get the most, right? It's how did you end up specializing in that? Long story short, Dave, I have always loved history. I mean, my exposure to history was the old World at War documentaries on PBS, and my dad used to watch them. And I remember, being enamored with that. Well, as I got into high school, I still loved history. Wasn't always taught well, but, that's okay. I loved the subject. I wanted to study the history of the South. I knew that Southern history was different. I wasn't sure exactly why, but I just wanted to understand why the South is what it is. I knew nothing about civil rights. Absolutely nothing. Nothing. At Spring Hill, I learned a little. But the reason that I went to the University of Mississippi is because they specialized in Southern cultural history. And I thought, okay, I don't know exactly what that is, but that's what they do. And I quickly learned that if you want to study Southern history and Southern culture, you cannot study it without understanding the centrality of the African American experience. And most importantly, if you want to study the modern South, you have to study the civil rights movement. You have to know it backward and forward. And I think the thing was, Dave, is that it was more of an intellectual curiosity than anything else. The more that I learned, the more I questioned why I wasn't taught this stuff before. Mm-hmm. So that's the long and the short of it. And, from a human perspective, I've just never understood if America is what it claims to be, and that is the land of opportunity with with liberty and justice for all. How could we justify, particularly in the South, a heavily, as Flannery O'Connor says, the South is Christ haunted, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is a very religious region. It makes it into the literature. It makes it into daily commentaries. How on earth, if we are both proud Americans and good God-fearing people, do we discriminate against somebody just because of the color of their skin? I never could wrap my mind around it.
And I tell you what, you hit it like boom, right on that. Yeah.
It's the most obvious contradiction that I think we live with as Americans today. Not just with white and black, but with any group. How can we disqualify people from equal citizenship rights just because they are, you fill in the blank? For a while, it was Jim Crow black. Mm-hmm. And as I learned about segregation, legalized segregation, I learned that, yeah, segregation is over. But that doesn't mean that racism is over.
That's right.
There is something called de jure segregation, and that's segregation by law. And we've eliminated that. The Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65 were supposed to eliminate race as a disqualifying feature of those citizenship rights. However, you can pass laws. You can't change systems and institutions with law. And that's called de facto segregation. Mm-hmm. So we've got schools that are unequally funded. We have the crime of driving while black that is a very, very real thing for people who don't look like me. We have residential segregation. We have city amenities. We have employment opportunities. The list goes on and on and on. And sometimes when we talk about things that are obvious, like Confederate imagery, for example, this is absolutely in my wheelhouse as well. It's not about that piece of stone. It's about something much deeper. And I see it as sort of my, for lack of a better term, calling to educate people on what that symbol means to different people and how it has changed over time. It's incumbent upon me, because now I know my history. I know my facts. It's incumbent upon me to talk to people who look like me about things that they never would have considered, right? It's not what you think it is. Or have you ever considered this perspective? Or this is why people believe and feel what they do about certain things. And that goes all the way to police brutality, Confederate imagery, white privilege, on and on and on.
You've actually hit on a lot of topics we're going to be talking about in your little segment, the white guy in the room, right?
Are we diving in too fast?
We're diving in a little too quick,
which
is okay, because we're gonna hit that. But that was a great segue into all of the things we're going to be talking about. And I love how you went through and explained how you got interested in all of this, and how it's really become an important fabric in what makes Mike Butler.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, I do have this little section I call the review, where we just talk about something that recently happened. And I actually have a hat to commemorate the occasion. So I am of the Slytherin house for Harry Potter. Just experienced my first Harry Potter week at Flagler College because in 2019 really didn't understand what the hell it was. Right? I knew they were excited, and I knew we had the reference of Harry Potter at the college. But then 2020, nothing. So yesterday I had a chance to experience the big dinner in the dining hall. Pretty cool, interesting event, very well received. A lot of students out there. But somebody made a comment about how, man, it still feels weird. Like everybody's together, like all of this stuff just happening. And the students said, this is cool that we're all here, but we can't forget that there still is this thing called a global pandemic going on, right? So there was still a level of, hey, this is nice, but it still feels different. But I just had to bring it up because that was one of the most interesting things I've gotten to experience. And I'm in my third year at Flagler, and I've experienced a lot of cool things. But it was nice to see. And I don't know if I'm appreciating it from a different mindset, because the last 18 months has just been so different. Do you have anything that you've experienced recently that you're like, hey, people, you might want to know about this. You might want to check this out.
It's totally unrelated, but since we're doing the review, I'm typically not the first in line to see historical movies or movies that are quote unquote based on a true story. But if we're talking about things that we've recently encountered, just a couple of days ago, for the first time, I watched Judas and the Black Messiah, which is about Fred
That's
Hampton.
such a good movie. Such a good movie.
It was awesome. It was awesome. For me as well, the image of the Black Panthers is so stereotypical, and I thought that film did the best job of showing what the Black Panthers were about of any popular medium that I've seen. Also demonstrated the long tensions between African-American activists and the police, even the federal government. Federal government had COINTELPRO, which was the counterintelligence operation. So everything that I knew about Fred Hampton, everything that I knew about J. Edgar Hoover, I didn't know as much about Bill O'Neill, the African-American who worked as. I knew who he was. I knew that he had gone on Eyes on the Prize and committed suicide the day that it premiered. So I knew all that, but just the performances, the directing, everything was so good. So, sometimes people ask me, hey, Dr. Butler, you're a history professor. Do you recommend any movies that I should watch that are, pretty true to form? And Judas and the Black Messiah it blew me away. It was incredible.
It was incredible. And kind of going with some of the movies things, and this isn't as impactful, but I think can be as impactful, especially for Black women. I know we have the movie coming out about the Williams sisters and their journey. And the reason it resonates with me so much is if not for the Williams sisters, for some of the tennis tournaments, there would not be equal pay for some of the women there. So I know it's going to be a little bit more of a commercialized, hey, come check out this movie about the Williams sisters and what their dad did. But the Williams sisters have had such an impact on everything, right? Not just Black women, but women's issues and Black issues. But it really resonated with me because I remember them being booed at tennis tournaments because they were Black women going out to play tennis. I remember them being discounted when they were trying to be activists to get equal pay at tennis tournaments, saying, hey, we play just as hard. We should get the same pay. And some people dismissing them.
In the foreign press, their physical characteristics.
Yes. Well, and I don't know if you remember that one announcer for tennis that got fired, because he was saying guerrilla to mean like guerrilla warfare. But still, that's probably not the best word to use when Serena Williams is playing tennis, because there's some people who are not going to differentiate what he's referring to. And right away, they continue, because she always received a lot of criticism for her body type, which for me, I always, I'll be honest, I always find her to be one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen. And as far as physically, I sat there and was like, man, I wish physically I could be as dominant as Serena Williams.
It's incredible.
She's just an unbelievable individual. I'm sorry, Mike, what were you saying?
Oh, no. It's incredible that Serena is as dominant in her field in such a sports-obsessed culture, and she is not seen on the same level as Roger Federer by most sports fans or Tom Brady. And I'm interested in the movie as well, Dave, because you probably know as well as I do, Richard Williams was portrayed in the media as a kook.
Yeah.
So, we criticize the lack of Black fathers, which is a trope. But yet when we have someone who is very protective of his kids and trying to do what's best for them because they're so physically talented, he's portrayed as a weirdo of some sort. So,
well, same thing happened with Earl Woods, right? Absolutely. With Tiger Woods coming up, right? And very present Black father. And then he was kind of demonized for some of the techniques and things that he used. And it was that damned if you do, damned if you don't. So if he's not there, he's the typical absent Black father. Yeah. If he is there, he's, like you said, he's the kook that is doing all the wrong things as a father. He should be doing things this way or that way. You are dead on. You are so
same
right.
Thing with LeVar Ball. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the Tagovailoa family. right? And
Yeah.
so we're sensing a trend here, right?
Yeah, you are definitely right. But hopefully people will check out Judas and the Black Messiah because that is a great movie, and I do plan on checking out the movie with the Williams sisters. Going into the next segment, HTM highlights. I got to stay true to my area just to get a little take on it. So there's a couple of things I wanted to bring up. One, anybody who's looking at flying, please beware of American Airlines. Right, they're not the only airline that's having issues, but they seem to be having issues at a more frequent rate. They're increasing at an increasing rate with cancellations and issues. They say they're getting it under control, but I'm not going to lie, it makes me worried anytime I hear somebody say I'm flying American Airlines. My daughter is going to be flying American Airlines home for the holidays, and I'm like, oh shit, she may not even make it home over the holidays. So that was just kind of my little tidbit. When we checked out Delta and United and some of the other airlines, they were booked solid because they've had a little bit more reliability ratings. So that's just kind of I guess that's more of an HTM low light, but I'm saying it as a highlight for people just to be patient, understand that you should be happy for the people that are showing up, grinding, giving everything they have, because a lot of people aren't showing up. So be a little bit more patient with those that are there because they're going through a tough time too. But just beware with your airline travel plans coming up because it has been crazy. Mike, I know you traveled recently. Speak on it. I know we were talking a little bit about it before we got on, but what was your experiences?
Yeah, I received the invitation from Dean Wayne Riggs, who is teaching at the University of Würzburg in Würzburg, Germany right now.
Oh, I didn't realize he was doing that.
Yes.
So I'm not gonna lie. I see his pictures and I'm like, man, he's got like a great vacation going on, but he's actually over there teaching.
He's actually over there teaching, and we've had a partnership with the university for a while, but we're looking to, or at least Dr. Riggs told me that we're looking to sort of broaden it. We have students at Würzburg. The number 2 destination for their students to travel internationally for student exchanges after the University of Texas is Flagler College. Exactly.
On that. Yes, that's awesome.
So what they want is to initiate programs to bring more Flagler students to Würzburg for a full semester. It would cost our students nothing except the plane ticket, Dave. Nothing. So a former professor at Würzburg, historian, is now the mayor of a town called Rothenburg. It is a quaint little walled medieval old city, 10,000 residents, but it's one of the most popular tourist destinations in Germany. It reminds me a lot of St. Augustine in terms of how old it is and how everything is based around hospitality and tourism. And they are really interested in doing some sort of partnership with our HTM program in which students may come over to Würzburg and build their resumes in terms of how hospitality and tourism can work in a European setting, and add to, that's, I told you that your name came up a few times, and that's why.
Man, that's awesome, man. Hey, that's great, man. I tell you what, I got no problem making that trip, making that happen.
Well, it's a willing partnership. Würzburg wants it. Rothenburg, the city, wants it. Flagler students that I've talked to are really interested.
They definitely want. I know they definitely would want that. That's not even that's a no-brainer right there.
Hospitality tourism in St. Augustine is unique. That should draw people to Flagler because of St. Augustine. Mm-hmm. But with an international component, a summer class maybe in Würzburg, I don't know. Those are details that I think could be worked out to the benefit of our students, and it would help them tremendously. So that's the plan.
Hey, that's what's up. So we may be doing an episode one time from Würzburg, right? We're doing a Roll the Dice with Dave from Würzburg, talking about our partnership out there. So that could be one. I'd be down for that. That'd be a fun trip. That would be a fun thing to do.
That would be a lit episode of Roll the Dice.
It definitely would. It definitely would. So moving into our next topic, now we're going to start shifting and moving into really what we've been getting ready to talk about, the social justice issues and those types of things. And you, a lot of times being the only white guy in the room, having these types of conversations. So the In Your Opinion piece, we typically focus on what's going on in a current event. And there's really two, it's crazy how these two current events have happened kind of at the same time, because this is a defining moment from my perspective going forward on how these cases end up turning out. So one, we have the Arbery case, and the other one, we have the Rittenhouse case. What are your thoughts, if you followed those up to this point, on how those are going, and what do you think the verdicts and how that could impact social justice movements in each one? Oh, that's a lot to digest, brother. I know it is.
A lot to digest. And I don't want to come across as too cynical,
Mhm.
but we learn from the past that we learn nothing from the past. I've heard during my lifetime that the trial of the Klansmen who lynched Michael Donald in Mobile, Alabama in the early 80s, that was going to be a defining moment, and that was going to change things. It really didn't. I heard that the Rodney King trial was going to finally, on film, we get to watch what Black people go through. It didn't change anything. I saw the Derek Chauvin trial, and we're moving toward equal administration of justice, but one verdict will not erase hundreds of years of racial discrimination. And what I fear, Dave, is the same thing that I heard in the aftermath of the Derek Chauvin case. It's, well, now we can move forward.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually we can't. Because Derek Chauvin is still the exception to the rule. The rule is white police, white people typically get off for doing heinous things, even taking the lives of Black people, period. That's the rule. But we celebrate the exception by saying things have changed. Maybe in one instance, and Derek Chauvin thought he was getting off. I fear that Rittenhouse is going to get off, and I'm cautiously optimistic with Arbery. It just bothers me that when we claim that our justice system is based on due process, and as part of due process, you're tried by a jury of your peers, and you live in a county that's 28% Black, and you have one Black juror and 11 whites, that we celebrate that as somehow some accomplishment. No, it's not.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've already seen, I mean, it was 7 weeks after the tape was released that those initially 2 clowns were arrested, and the third. So, you know, in my opinion, it's not going to have a long-term impact on a system and institution and practice that has had several years, decades to permeate those systems and corrupt it. Now, I'll give you a great example of that. One of the reasons that the father and son felt so empowered to evoke a citizen's arrest on Ahmaud Arbery was because of the Georgia law with the citizen's arrest. That goes back to slave patrols. Slave patrols were allowed to invoke by law citizen's arrest to bring wayward slaves back to the plantation. And for people who say that, you know, history, well, that's in the past. No, it's not. Georgia just repealed the citizen's arrest thing after the Arbery case because you saw where it went. But this idea that white people feel empowered to do whatever the hell they want to people, thinking that they'll get off, whether it's lynching Ahmaud Arbery, because that's what it was, brother. It was a lynching. Taking a gun across state lines to a protest, or storming the Capitol to overturn an election that had no evidence of fraud and malfeasance, and expect to walk away without consequence. That's white privilege in a nutshell.
Yeah, and with these cases, especially with the Arbery case, it scares me because no matter which way it goes, it's catastrophic from a number of ways. And the thing that scares me is, let's say you get a guilty, right? Then you have some of those going, see,
The
check,
system works.
right? Check. Just like the number of individuals I've heard when they said, "Oh, Barack Obama's president," there's absolutely no way racism could still exist, and they feel it's a check mark, and it's not a check mark. Or they get off, right? Then we have all of these things again, and where's the justice? Because I still have conversations with people saying that even if he was guilty for stealing wood, that does not justify shooting and killing a man in the middle of the street. And with the Rittenhouse one, when he keeps claiming self-defense, I've had to explain to people, I said, if I was out protesting and I saw a random person walking around with an AR and I rush them, I'm rushing them for self-defense because they have an AR walking around the middle of the street. And both of them, no matter what happens, it's really catastrophic to what it can do to those that are trying to push the social justice initiative forward and making sure everybody is treated equally and fairly and justly.
So. And if there is a public backlash, then the focus is not going to be on the reason that people are angry. It's going to be on the people themselves.
On the people themselves.
Why are they acting like this? They're acting like this because they're sick and tired of the system failing them at every turn. That's why. Historically, it's unassailable that the system is rigged. Period.
That's right.
So yeah, I'm my thoughts on it. I think Rittenhouse, I mean, look, man, you've got, like you said, you've got an AR, you're walking past cops and they're not stopping you. That tells you something's wrong with the system, with society as a whole there, because if it would have been a black person with an AR walking by cops, I don't think they would have just let them pass.
Well, they wouldn't have been walking, right? It definitely wouldn't have been walking taking place.
That's absolutely right. And when it comes to Arbery, that for me, the big picture is, why do white people feel like they are entitled to hunt down a black person who lives in the neighborhood just because they thought what in our society gives people the right to think that they can get away with literal murder? That's the problem, not necessarily. I mean, you see the cover-ups, you see the attorney general in the county. I think, was it the attorney general, the county prosecutor, state prosecutor in the county, trying to cover things up and hide it. She just got caught. It happens all the time. She just got caught. So yeah, and there's something that I've learned. I forgot where I first heard this, but just because you love a black person doesn't mean you love black people.
Correct.
And I think we've seen a lot of that with Obama, right? You alluded to Obama checked a huge box. There's a black president, and you hear that. Oh, okay, now we're racial.
You hear it all the time. Yeah.
No, you can appreciate LeBron James. You can even maybe buy his jersey. But if he wears a hoodie on the court, shut up and dribble.
Mm-hmm.
It's you might like a black person. You might love a black person. That doesn't mean you like black people. And it damn sure doesn't mean you're post-racial in your thinking.
That's definitely correct. And actually, you just hit on something which is taking us to kind of our main topic of conversation. You know, being the white guy in the social justice room, you've brought up so many good points, but, you know, you're coming from a place of education. You understand the history, coming through a lot of things. And I want to it's going to get a little personal kind of with some of your experiences. But the first question I have for you, as far as being the white guy in the social justice room, when was your earliest recollection of I'm white and I'm treated differently? I know that's a tough question, right? But I just wonder if you have this moment where you were like, oh, this is what it means to be white. compared to
think
some other people in this country?
because of my background, my experiences, I was aware that there was a difference between black people and white people from the time I could remember. And it was not that we're equal, right? I mean, as I've gotten older, I've tried to understand people's perspectives a little more instead of judging them for what they were. I have really tried to put myself in their shoes, and it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. My relatives were products of the segregated Jim Crow South. My uncles went through school integration in Mobile, Alabama. The teachers that I had who were white had definite opinions about how Martin Luther King made the state of Alabama look bad, how he was a troublemaker, how he was out for self-glory. So I had all of that impressed upon me as a young kid from a working class family in Mobile, Alabama. So there wasn't a moment where I said, "Oh, I'm white, and that therefore makes me better," whatever the case may be. But it's always been ingrained in the culture. And not only that, I'm trying to fix this light, Dave. I look like Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse. Speaking from the shadows. So I apologize for that.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good.
We're recording. It's night here, and I usually have my blinds up. But anyway, I do remember the Michael Donald case in 1980 in Mobile, and it was a young man named Michael Donald who is called the last lynching in America, which it wasn't, by the way, but he was lynched in retaliation for a black man getting off for killing a white police officer. So the local Klan in Mobile decided that they're gonna, if it's an eye for an eye, they're gonna pick somebody, and they just at random chose this guy and literally hanged him from a tree in downtown Mobile. And it started, it announced that the Klan was still around. And I remember a Klan parade being planned right in front of the apartment complex where I lived. So I had a young girl on my baseball team whose dad wore a big KKK belt buckle to the games.
Wow.
So yeah, so I always had a sense of difference, but it was always almost a siege mentality of our way of, stop me if you've heard this before, our way of life is being threatened. Things are different. We have to resist. We have to hold the line. And that's when I started learning, that's why I said the education is so important. And as I started learning, and I'm like, whoa, this is the civil rights movement is the quintessential American story, right? It's what makes us who we are. It's what makes us unique in many aspects of world history. The civil rights movement held up a mirror to the United States of America and asked, do we really live up to our principles and values? And the answer was a resounding no.
No, yeah.
So I've always been aware that for whatever the reason, race mattered. And it mattered to people because that was their identity. I am white. And if whiteness is under siege, that meant that you had to defend it as part of your quote unquote culture.
Thank you so much for that answer. It actually leads well into my next question. So you and I have been to several meetings where we're talking about social justice issues and all that. And sometimes you find yourself, right? And I think about us as parallels. Sometimes I walk into the room and I'm the only person of color in a room to make decisions or to be involved in a committee, so be it. I'm sure you have found yourself sometimes as the only white person in a room where social justice issues have been discussed. What is the biggest disadvantage of being the only white person in the room when these conversations are being held? And the reason I ask you this, and you and I talked a little bit about this before, is the most dangerous place from my perspective, and we've heard this saying before, for any kind of situation is in somebody's mind. They make it their own way. So, here you walk in, you're sitting down, you're discussing these social justice issues. What do you think is the biggest disadvantage to being Mike Butler sitting in that room with people of color if you're the only white person in there? Because a lot of people don't understand your perspective. They
No, they
only
don't.
understand theirs. What do you think is the biggest disadvantage to you being in that room?
Well, Dave, rarely am I the only white person in the room. However, I like to think of myself often as the only ally that minorities have who happens to be white in that room. And that's part of the mistrust, right? And that's what I get. Usually in these rooms where these conversations are occurring, the white person is there to talk down the black people, right? To white-splain to them why what they're doing is, and here's the other thing in academia that's so frustrating. We love buzzwords like diversity and inclusion. And we love those buzzwords until it comes time for us to practice what we preach as a college.
So it's like the other day I told somebody, especially from a woman's perspective with equal pay, a lot of times that comes out. I said, everybody's all about equal pay, and until it's time for them to give up their piece so everybody can be equal.
That's right.
Then nobody wants to give up that piece. So that's a lot of what it sounds like you're discussing right there.
Yeah, there is a lot of that. It's easy to talk about in an academic setting. It's easy to talk about it at a table surrounded by like-minded people. But what does that mean for our students when they are involved in protests against the Confederate monument? Do we value their opinion then, or do we try to rein them in? I understand when I come into a room where these issues are on the table, that because of my accent, because of my skin tone, that I'm going to be met initially with skepticism or trust is something that has to be earned, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't earn trust just by saying the right things, using the right catchphrases when it's comfortable to do it. So I get it. And I learned this, again, by being a historian, right? And I keep going back to that. You've seen me in public settings where I always start with, when we talk about this stuff, let's talk about the history, because the history informs the present, right? I've been asked before if I consider myself an activist, and I've said no. I'm an educator. But with what I do, education is a form of activism. Educating people is a form of activism. So that's what I think I bring to the table. When I can be an ally with historical truths and examples of when, we've been told X, Y, and Z, and it hasn't panned out. This is pretty common. I get it. But as a historian, when I did oral histories with civil rights participants and leaders in Pensacola, Florida, which is what my book's about, I often had to ask, particularly the primary organizer of the Pensacola movement. His name, I love the guy, Reverend H.K. Matthews. H.K. Matthews, initially, there's this white kid from Ole Miss who wants to interview me about me going to prison, basically. First time, he didn't acknowledge it. Second time, he may have called me back. When he finally consented to an interview, he said, I can give you 30 minutes. Perfect. If you come to Bruton, Alabama, perfect. We talked for over 3 hours that first time. So it's once you demonstrate that you are someone who is worthy of being trusted, or that actually knows the history of what we speak of, that gets me into places that other white people who show up with their buzzwords won't get access.
Won't get into.
So I get it. And here's the fine line. And trust me, man, I'm not going to sit here and say that what I experience is the same as what the people of color experience, because it's not even the same. But I am aware that I don't want to say too much, because you don't want to be seen as seeing yourself as the white savior who's going to come in and unite everybody. And no, people of color have heard that all their life. They've always had white people who try to take credit for things and unite and say, well, you don't know how to do this, but I do. The listening more than I talk, offering suggestions based on my historical knowledge, and then practicing what I preach when people aren't looking is, to me, what builds trust. And that's all it is. Now, I am also very willing, my wife may not agree, but I'm very willing to say that I'm sorry that I didn't know that. Because, I get it. It's not my experience, but it is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't know what it's like to be you. And gosh, I forgot what figure said this, but think of, it may have been actually Chris Rock. It was Dave Chappelle who said, despite how famous, how rich, and how popular I am, there's no white person in this audience that would trade places with me for one day.
One day. Yeah, that was, I think, Dave Chappelle.
And there's a lot of truth to that. So I get that, and I acknowledge that, and I respect that incredibly. I see my job, though, Dave, in these conversations is, number one, being an ally. Number two, giving my historical expertise to the conversation. And maybe more importantly, explaining perspectives to other white people that they would not have, maybe they wouldn't accept from someone who doesn't look like me and sound like me.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. No, I was going to say, you talk about all your experiences, and I know what kind of changed my perspective for a second, because I'll be honest, right? When I first met you, I remember it was during my orientation, and they were like, "Hey, this is Mike Butler, teaches history, civil rights history," right? And my first thought, right? I think they even said, do a lot of social justice history, and then they go through it, and I'm like, what does this do? Right? I'm being honest. I was like, what does this dude really know about leading, right, social justice issues on this predominantly white campus with predominantly white students, right? And I'm like, we're in St. Augustine, which Martin Luther King said is one of the most lawless cities in America, right? So all of these things, and I'm like, here's this guy, and we're turned the corner for me. We started having relationships and building that trust and having conversations. And it turned into, hey, man, this is just a dude, just like any other dude I met that I would like to hang out with. What really turned the corner for me was you and I sat on a panel. I don't know if you remember this. We sat on a panel with some board of trustees and some students, and we were talking about a situation about a Confederate monument being moved. And the look of frustration you had when you were trying to explain things and people just weren't getting it. And I was like, oh, shit. That's the same look I feel a lot of times when I'm trying to explain things. So you had this look on your face, and you reached the point that you were just kind of like,
yep,
man, I can't say anything else, man. I've said it every possible way I can, and they just ain't getting it. So I'm just going to sit here and chill. And the crazy thing was when I started saying things, like they started absorbing it, but I was saying the exact same thing you were. And I was like, this is a situation where everybody's discounting what the white guy is saying in the room, but the white guy is speaking truth. But I felt that there was a level of discount because you were the white guy, right? You're the white guy, and what do you know about this stuff? Well, you teach it, you study it, the historical facts behind it. I started saying some of the exact same things, and there was a level of, okay, I could absorb this and I'll listen to what you have to say. But it was really at that moment when I saw the look of frustration on your face, that listen to what I'm telling you. Why aren't you listening to me? I'm telling you, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to educate you. That look of frustration, Mike, I've had it. We shared it, and it turned the corner for me. And for me, I went, you know what? This guy is an ally because he's just as pissed off that nobody's listening, and he's just trying to educate. So I didn't mean to interrupt when you were kind of going through, but that was a moment for me where you and I really, I felt, I was like, you know what, this guy's legit, and I wish more people would listen to what he had to say.
Well, I number one, this is a cool moment for your viewers because you've never told me that story.
I never have,
and I really appreciate that. That it means a lot because I was frustrated. I was incredibly frustrated, and one of the reasons that I was frustrated, and I remember that panel very, very well. We were told that this was going to be to have a discussion, and it wasn't a discussion. It was a full-throated defense by people who aren't used to being questioned about decisions that they make. Mm-hmm. And I had questions, brother.
Oh, I know. I remember. Yeah. But nobody, that's one of those things that at least in that moment, I thought back to what my brother always tells me. My brother, Damien, he's my younger brother, but I look up to him because he's probably the second greatest man in my life behind my dad. I was talking to my boys the other day, and I said, you guys may think you have the greatest dad, but I know I have the greatest dad in the world, period. He said, at that moment, just remember there's a scale. He goes, and these people are at a 1. He goes, you may not have moved them to that 5, 6, 7. He goes, but if you guys were able to just move them to a 2, you've accomplished the same as moving a mountain because those people were rooted at 1. And I said, the thing is, I don't know if I did. And he goes, that's okay. He goes, because at some point you may realize you did move them to a 2. And that's what helped me at least digest some of those moments during that time, what was going on. It was a very trying time for Flagler, very trying time for a lot of our students of all colors. There were a lot of people just going through a difficult time. But that day resonated with me so much because you and I shared something, and I was like, man, it's a shame nobody's listening, because at that moment I was like, man, we have a true ally, and people are now discounting the ally. So if they're discounting the ally, we may be in trouble with this argument. I never told you the story because at that moment I was like, you know what? That's irrelevant because I found a brother that we can see each other, understand where you're white from Alabama, I'm Puerto Rican from New York. We can see it, we can recognize it, we can love it, we can accept it, and not play the colorblind game.
Right. Because
we realize that is more damaging than anything.
Look, man, I hate the colorblind argument because we all see color. Mm-hmm. It's not whether or not you see color. It's how do you respond when you see a different color. That is absolute garbage to say I don't see color. And it's usually an excuse that racists use when their racism has been called out, right? No, we all see color. We've got 2 eyes. We can unless you're colorblind, people look different. They're from different colors. How does that change the way that you interact with them when you realize they are a different color? That's the question. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. You never know what seeds are going to sprout. But those guys were at a 1 and they thought they were at a 10. And that's what bothered me. Yeah. Yeah. That was the don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining argument. You tell me you're here to have a conversation and to understand, and you're not. You're here to make excuses and to defend the indefensible, in my opinion. And when I drop facts, you deflect. And you're lawyers. You're lawyers. And you're using these cockamamie excuses on me. No. That was the frustration. On the other hand, you're right. I remember being on the contextualization committee for the monument, and after I defended one of the plaques that we wrote, which was about the monument in memory, and it contained the word white supremacy because that monument, as it was stated, some people do view it as a monument to celebrate white supremacy. You know why I know that? Because I've listened to black people. After I defended that, someone came up behind me and I thought, ooh, it was a white person. And he just leaned down and said, how does it feel to be a self-hating Southerner? So it's either you're a self-hating Southerner, you have white guilt, or you're trying to, you have your own reasons for doing this. No, my reasons for doing this is to teach people things that I didn't know and wouldn't know unless I was fortunate enough to go into graduate school and focus on this. That's my interest, so that we can be more empathetic. I think that's the greatest thing that I've gotten out of all my experiences, Dave. I have learned to listen to and understand the pain of people whose pain I don't share. Mm. That's the most. So I have empathy for people whose experiences aren't mine. That is one of the things that this voyage has kind of taught me. So I do listen, and I do think that, hey man, maybe sometimes naively, that if you knew the history of this, maybe you would change your mind. But you can lead a horse to water, right?
Can't make it drink. I was just like, yeah, it's so true, man. And you and I kind of were talking about that before the show. There's a lot of things we can do, but somebody's got to be ready, open, willing, accepting. As we kind of start getting to the end of the show, and really, we may have to have you back for part 2, because I feel we've barely scratched the surface. May have to have you back on part 2. But I have this last question for you before we get into the final segment of the Rant and Rave with Dave. You talked a lot about some of the issues that come up. What do you think are the advantages, or I guess the positive you've experienced as being the white person in the room? And you touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the positive or advantages or the good things that have come from being the white person in the room talking about social justice?
That sometimes people in positions of power who are also white will listen to me more than they'll listen to people of color, just because that's an inherent bias. That's my role as ally. I know that in some cases, when I speak for a community, the community has been saying the same thing and getting nowhere. But when I say it, because I'm Dr. Butler, and I'm a white guy with this accent, again, that's actually more effective. That's a privilege that comes with being a college professor, right? Yeah. So that's the biggest, that's one of the positives that comes out of it. 2, I think, I'm not just a person that points out the past to say things are never going to change. I like to have solutions for problems. I like to be able to offer. It's one of the things I've learned from the movement. Dr. King, every time he went into a neighborhood, every time he went into a campaign, what do we want out of this and how can we get it? You have to be able to articulate so that white people are real quick to say, oh, black people are just complaining because they want to complain. No, they have an objective, and this is the objective, and this is how we can get there and make everybody happy. Sometimes it takes compromise. It's a dirty word in politics today, but sometimes it does take compromise, right? You have to have a method. You have to have an end goal, and you have to have a way to get it there. The other thing that I get out of this that means more to me than anything else, Dave, is the respect of students, peers, and colleagues. For the people that don't respect who I am and what I represent, I lose absolutely no sleep over that. But for people who say, Mike, I'm really proud of you standing up for that. Or students to say, Dr. Butler, I never really thought of that. You really inspired me to XYZ. Man, you can't put a dollar figure on that. And I don't do it for respect. But when I hear someone say, thank you, because I represented an issue as a white person that they never could, that means more to me than anything.
I like that. I like that. And here's another little tidbit. Hopefully, you don't mind me sharing this. Another moment where I kind of that respect tick went up a little more for you. We both sit on faculty senate, right? And there was a conversation taking place. I had talked about the situation, um, and requested that there be more time. Somebody was trying to believe a call time, and you said my colleagues haven't finished speaking yet, so I motion that we continue until we finish. Um, and I was like, man, that's dope that he did that, because a lot of people were ready to go, and I agreed with you. I was like, I had my chance to speak,
That's right.
Right, and it
And
really shows that you walk the walk as well as talk the talk, right? At least for me in that moment, there are a lot of people that can say, oh yeah, I do this, but you actually did it. You said, oh, my colleagues have something to say. I motion we continue to talk until everybody has a chance to say what they have to say. And
the
I really
people
admire you
who,
for
yeah, I appreciate that too, because, and I meant it. It wasn't pandering. It wasn't trying to win points. It was, I saw people who usually didn't speak up in a public forum at Senate. I saw colleagues that didn't have much to say about some things for whatever reasons raise their hand. They had just as much right to state their opinion as we did. And maybe for whatever reason, they didn't feel empowered, they didn't feel comfortable, but now they do. Look, man, I wanted to get out of there at 5:32. I had papers to
I
grade.
have things to do. Yeah, yeah.
But we are elected to the Senate for issues like that we were discussing. And I did want to hear what they had to say. And for those, I know that it didn't go over well with some people. And you know what? I don't care. I just don't. I don't. That being liked doesn't matter as much to me as being respected. And I genuinely wanted to hear what they had to say. And it went on another 30 minutes because and some of the most impactful things I heard that day came
in that last 30 minutes. Yeah,
yes.
Last 30 minutes. So I appreciate that. Dr. Butler, as we get ready to wrap up, I have the last little segment called the Rant and Rave with Dave. Please share your final thoughts. You've dropped so much. I know I'm going to be sending you an invite for a part 2 because there's so much more we can talk about. And I could talk to you for hours. I remember after one meeting, you and I sat in your office and we must have talked for about 45 minutes to an hour afterward. I could talk to you for a long time. I love talking with you. You're such a great person to speak with, and I have a lot of respect for you. And I'm looking forward to our friendship blossoming even more than it has.
Absolutely. Man, we haven't talked about sports. We haven't talked we haven't talked about my next research project, which is about Black cultural representation in music, film, and television in the 1970s. There's so many things. So that's my rant and rave, Dave. It's all this fun stuff that we talked about in my office. You had to go all serious and present the thoughtful, reflective side of Dr. Butler. There's a fun side too, baby. I know how to get there.
I know. Well, I know you went to Ole Miss, right? So I know there's a fun side in you, because Ole Miss is one of the spots, man. It is one of the spots.
Dude. I've told people this several times. I take what I do seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously. Anything you want to talk about, I'm game. My rant would be, and I still can't wrap my mind around this. And the more information we get from January 6th, the more frustrating it is for me. How on earth can anybody defend what happened that day? How can you characterize it as that wasn't a terrorist mob that was trying to overthrow the government, that was literally trying to reverse the effects, reverse the results of what has been demonstrated was a legitimate, secure election. How can you say to Jonathan Karl on tape that it's common sense that they want to lynch Mike Pence? What? And walk away with no consequences? Brother, that's white privilege right there. The fact that I can call on a mob to go overthrow the government and hang my political enemies in the United States of America and not suffer any consequences when those people are too stupid to do it. That's my rant.
Well, I appreciate your rant and your rave with Dave. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mike. I really appreciate it. Love the conversation, and know
Great.
that I will be inviting you back, and we'll go with the fun side of Mike Butler, which I think we did get a chance to see. We may not talk about fantasy football because my fantasy football team sucks right now, so we'll have to leave that alone. But we'll talk sports. We'll definitely talk all kinds of things. We may have to even talk about your college days. I bet that we could probably make that into a movie, or did they already? Animal House. Right?
No, man, I was
No,
a studious young man. I was always in the library, plugging away at that dissertation. Yeah, man, no, I was. Yeah, there'll be some things that aren't for public consumption there, Dave. But
All right. We'll touch on that when we get there. But ladies and gentlemen, please don't forget to tune in to the next episode of Roll the Dice with Dave. Mike, thank you again for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. Great conversation. Looking forward to part 2 and part 3 soon, my friend.
Hey, man, I appreciate you having me, and hope it doesn't drive off viewers. But you're the best, Dave.